It started with a whisper in the Capitol's marble halls, a curious murmur that crept through committee rooms and echoed softly between security checkpoints. "Did you hear what Bondi just filed?" A question laced with tension passed between aides like a volatile secret. No one knew exactly what it meant, yet. But within hours, every ear in Washington was tuned in. Something big had detonated, legally speaking, and the blast radius was spreading. Pam Bondi wasn't new to drama. The former Florida Attorney General had made her name with a sharp legal mind and an even sharper tongue. But after years of high-profile cases and political skirmishes, she'd receded from the limelight. Or so it seemed. Some said she was laying low, waiting. Others believed she was done. They were all wrong. The clock had just struck 6 a.m. in D.C. when Bondi, in a crisp navy suit, stepped out of a black SUV and strode into the federal courthouse like a woman with a purpose and a fuse already lit. In her hand was a thick, manila folder. Inside it, a legal petition that would ripple through the country like a thunderclap. The target? None other than Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. This wasn't about partisan jabs or political theater. No, this was calculated, brutal, and backed by months of behind-the-scenes legwork. Bondi had been gathering evidence, building a case, like a chess master eyeing her final move. Now she was about to make it. But why now? And why Pelosi? To understand that, you had to go back a few months, to a private, off-the-record meeting in Palm Beach where Bondi had first caught wind of a series of legislative backdoor deals that, if true, blurred the lines between influence and impropriety. The whispers had reached her from a reliable source, a former congressional staffer turned whistleblower, frightened but determined. Pelosi's office, the whistleblower claimed, had brokered a set of quiet appropriations in exchange for campaign influence, deals too neat, too convenient to be coincidence. If proven, it would shatter trust at the highest level of government and possibly bring down the speaker herself. But Bondi didn't charge in recklessly. She studied. She confirmed. She followed the paper trail like a bloodhound, sifting through hundreds of pages of contracts, communications, and financial transactions that linked policy to personal benefit. Her findings? Explosive. That morning, as the first glint of sunrise broke over the Capitol dome, Bondi's move became clear. She was going for the jugular, and as the media caught wind, the headlines lit up like wildfire. Bombshell legal motion. Filed against Pelosi by former Florida AG, Pam Bondi alleges massive ethics violations. Investigation looms. The narrative was no longer whispered. It roared across newsrooms, podcasts, and primetime screens. What Bondi had just done wasn't a stunt. It was a direct hit, and for the first time in over a decade, Nancy Pelosi wasn't controlling the conversation. She was the subject of it, and the war was just beginning. It was a humid October evening when the phone call came, the kind that doesn't show up on caller ID, the kind that only rings once before someone answers. Pam Bondi was sitting alone, on her back patio, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand, when the voice on the line, low and urgent, said, "Pam, you need to see this." The voice belonged to Jake Strickland, a former congressional investigator with a Rolodex deeper than most intelligence officers. He wasn't prone to exaggeration. If Jake was calling, something serious had surfaced. "Email incoming. Eyes only," he added, then hung up. Within minutes, Bondi was inside, laptop open, eyes narrowing as she scanned a zipped file folder containing scanned memos, encrypted communications, and one document that made her stomach drop. A red-lined draft of a legislative amendment with handwritten notes, clearly Pelosi's, and next to it, a string of Venmo transactions tied to a PAC donor group with known offshore holdings. "This isn't policy," Pam muttered to herself. "This is pay for play." But it wasn't just about the money. It was the brazen simplicity of it. The amendment had passed with minimal scrutiny, bundled inside a 1,000-page spending bill. No headlines, no public debate, just quiet influence, cloaked in procedure. Bondi knew immediately this wasn't something she could ignore. She called Jake back. "Where did this come from?" Whistleblower, former staffer on the House Oversight Committee. They're scared, but they've got everything. Emails, voice memos, even meeting logs. But they want you involved. You're not tied to Congress. You've got the legal chops and the guts. Pam paused. She hadn't taken a high-stakes case in over a year, not since her firm downsized and she'd shifted her focus to advocacy work and media commentary. But this wasn't just a legal challenge. This was a moral one, a constitutional one. She reached for her notebook, the one she only used when she felt the storm coming. She began sketching out timelines, contacts, jurisdictional hurdles. Her mind had already shifted gears. The next morning, she met the whistleblower in a dimly lit diner outside Alexandria. A young woman, maybe 30, with tense eyes and a flash, drive tucked inside a hollowed-out lip balm tube. "My name's Rachel. I worked under a senior policy advisor." "I didn't want to believe it at first," she said, sliding the drive across the table. "But I saw how she worked with Speaker Pelosi's team. These deals, these manipulations, they're deeper than I thought. And if they find out I came to you, I'm done." Pam looked her in the eyes. "Not on my watch." That was the moment it all shifted, when it stopped being a maybe and became a mission. From that day forward, Bondi dove headfirst into the darkness, determined to drag it into the light, no matter how powerful the people on the other side. And as she left the diner, clutching that flash drive like a loaded weapon, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about Pelosi anymore. This was about breaking the machine. Pam Bondi was used to pressure, but nothing prepared her for the maze she'd just walked into. With the flash drive decrypted and the documents vetted by 2 independent analysts, she had enough to make a preliminary case. But that was just the beginning. What came next was harder. Getting anyone inside the Beltway to listen. She filed a formal ethics complaint to the Office of Congressional Ethics, then submitted a sealed affidavit to the Department of Justice. Within 48 hours, the blowback began. Anonymous. Sources in major media outlets painted her move as politically motivated, a publicity stunt, and revenge theater from a has-been attorney with a conservative grudge. Pundits on morning shows rolled their eyes. "Bondi's looking for a fight that isn't there," one said. "No legs, no teeth," another scoffed. But behind closed doors, the power players weren't laughing. They were mobilizing. Emails leaked. Her firm received veiled threats. Lucrative. Clients suddenly reconsidered contracts. One senior partner told her, "Pam, maybe let this one go. You're picking a fight with a ghost wrapped in a firewall." She didn't respond. She just walked out, heart pounding but face unreadable. Jake tried to steady the ship. "You expected this, didn't you?" he asked over coffee. Late one. Night in Bondi's study, papers strewn across the floor like fallen soldiers. "I expected a war," Pam replied. "I didn't expect friendly fire." The whistleblower, Rachel, had gone quiet. Her phone disconnected. A neighbor later said 2 strange men had come by her apartment posing as federal agents, asking questions. Pam filed a protective motion that same night, but the message was clear. Someone high up wanted this buried and fast. Still, the documents spoke for themselves. Pam began organizing the timeline into a formal motion, a comprehensive filing that wouldn't just accuse, but indict. Not criminally yet, but politically, publicly, and surgically. She knew the rules. If you're going to challenge the Queen, you don't miss. But with each page she drafted, the weight of it all bore down harder. Was she doing this to expose the truth, or to make a name again? In her quietest moments, that question haunted her. There was a time she lived for the courtroom spotlight. Was this about justice or vindication? She stared at her reflection in the mirror one night. Face tired, eyes sharp, hands trembling as she held the motion draft. "Don't turn this into a vendetta," she whispered to herself. "Turn it into history." Then came the breaking point. A federal judge, once a longtime colleague, denied her emergency filing to compel further investigation. The ruling was paper-thin, vague in rationale. But what chilled Pam to the bone wasn't the legal loss. It was the last line of the judge's comments. The petitioner is advised to consider the reputational damage that may arise from pursuing politically destabilizing claims without institutional backing. It wasn't a ruling. It was a warning. Doctor. Swamp had woken up, and it was looking right at her. 3 days after the judge's warning, Pam Bondi disappeared from public view. No press, no appearances, no comment. Her absence sparked rumors. Had she backed down? Had Pelosi's machine finally broken her resolve? In truth, Pam hadn't run. She was regrouping. Inside a rented safe house in Virginia's countryside, Bondi sat hunched over a series of binders, printouts, and flash drives, pieces of a puzzle that was much bigger than anyone realized. Jake had joined her there, eyes bleary from long nights of cross-referencing campaign data, congressional logs, and offshore accounts. But it wasn't until a knock came at the door, soft, deliberate, at midnight, that everything changed. Rachel had returned. She looked shaken, thinner than before, but her voice was steady. They know I talked, but they don't know what I kept. From inside her coat, she pulled out a second drive. This one wasn't on any network. I copied it off. My supervisor's secure laptop. He didn't know I had access to his backup cache. Pam took it carefully, her pulse quickening. The files inside were encrypted, but Bondi had seen this type before. It was congressional routing data, the kind used to trace how bills were quietly amended behind the scenes, who edited them, and when. When Jake cracked the first layer of encryption, they all went silent. Each file was labeled by amendment number and sponsor, and tied to each one was a string of internal memos, several of which referenced something chilling: Project Harvest. Pam's heart thudded in her chest as she opened one memo dated 6 months prior, addressed to a senior Pelosi staffer. The email contained the line, "Ensure donor guarantees are bundled through shell agreements under Harvest. Speaker approval secured. Full discretion required." Harvest wasn't a bill. It was an operation. Pelosi and her inner circle hadn't just influenced legislation, they had systematically created a shadow infrastructure to trade policy access for bundled donations, using nonprofits and legal loopholes to sanitize the trail. The money didn't just buy votes, it bought silence. This, Pam whispered, isn't just ethics. This is racketeering. In that moment, something in her shifted. The case had started as a fight against corruption, but now it was something more. It was about unmasking the untouchables, cracking open a fortress of secrecy and arrogance so deeply rooted it had rewritten the rules of power itself. And this time, she wouldn't just file a motion, she would drop a legal bombshell. That night, Bondi made a decision she never thought she'd make again. She called in a favor from an old DOJ contact, someone with teeth. She didn't ask for protection, she asked for a grand jury. But the cost came quickly. Within 24 hours, someone leaked her sealed motion to a major newspaper. The headline hit like a gut punch. Bondi targets Pelosi in desperate legal Hail Mary. No evidence, just noise. Suddenly, the media spun the narrative hard. She was cast as unhinged, vindictive, a relic. The whisper campaign turned into a roar. Her firm began closing ranks. An old law school dean disinvited her from a speaking engagement. Doors she once opened with ease were now slammed shut. Yet for all that noise, Pam didn't blink. Because now she knew the truth, and that knowledge was more dangerous than anything Pelosi's allies could print. She returned to D.C. with a fresh briefcase, a flash drive, and a fire in her gut. As she stepped through the marble threshold of the federal courthouse once more, she no longer felt like a lone attorney. She felt like a storm. The courtroom was packed, not with spectators. This wasn't that kind of trial. But with tension, with eyes, with power. Behind Bondi, a swarm of press filled the gallery, their laptops and notepads fluttering like a nest of startled birds. In front of her sat the panel of federal judges, stony-faced and unreadable. At the center of the storm, across from Pam, sat the legal defense team for the Speaker of the House. 5 attorneys deep, each pulled from the top firms in the country, each with a briefcase heavy enough to bury 100 truths. But Pam didn't flinch. She stood as the lead judge entered. No theatrics, just focus. This wasn't the kind of confrontation you could win with rhetoric. It had to be facts. Stone-cold, undeniable facts. And she had them. Over the course of 4 hours, Bondi laid it all out, methodically, surgically, like a surgeon cutting into a tumor. She presented the timeline of legislative amendments, linked them to donation cycles, and overlaid them with donor shell accounts and private correspondence flagged by whistleblower documents. She played a recorded voicemail, pulled from Rachel's cache, that left the room hushed. Madam Speaker is confident this language will pass. Just make sure the foundation gets there quarterly. Same routing. No flags this time. The voice? A senior Pelosi aide. Gasps, scribbling. One of the judges leaned forward. Pelosi's defense team fired back with force, accusing Bondi of political vendettas, framing the documents as taken out of context and misunderstood procedure. One attorney, red-faced and trembling with polished rage, slammed a folder down on the table. "This is a smear campaign wrapped in legalese." Pam didn't blink. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, and held up a single sheet of paper. Then explain why these routing numbers appear in both your client's campaign finance disclosures and on offshore PAC donation records in Luxembourg, within 3 days of each other. Same amount, same date, same shell account. Silence. The room froze. Pam's voice lowered. "This isn't a political stunt. This is a pattern, and it's one that cannot be ignored any longer." At that moment, something shifted. The judges, huddled in brief discussion. The lead, a steely woman with decades of judicial experience, looked over her glasses and spoke in a tone as sharp as a gavel. "Ms. Bondi, your evidence is compelling. We will forward this matter for immediate federal review and recommend a preliminary ethics inquiry through the Office of Congressional Conduct. Furthermore, we are placing a temporary injunction on any political action fund linked to these disclosures pending further investigation." It was the legal equivalent of lighting the fuse. Outside, the headlines erupted. Court grants Bondi request. Investigation into Pelosi officially underway. Legal bombshell rocks Capitol. Grand jury consideration imminent. Inside the courthouse, Pam finally exhaled. Not in triumph, but in relief. She hadn't won, not yet, but she had cracked the foundation. The unthinkable had been made real. The gate had been forced open, and the truth had a path forward. Jake met her in the hallway, eyes wide. "You did it," he said, barely above a whisper. Pam shook her head. "No, we started it. Now comes the real fight." She turned back for a moment, looking down the marble corridor toward the courtroom. Somewhere Nancy Pelosi's team was already on the phone, already spinning, already plotting their next move. But Bondi didn't care. She was no longer fighting to win a case. She was fighting to end a system. And now the whole country was watching. Weeks passed, then months. The storm didn't end, but it changed shape. Bondi's case lit a fire that couldn't be put out. The DOJ announced the formation of a special investigative unit, bipartisan committees called emergency hearings, and ethics watchdog groups began, compiling their own reports, emboldened by the sudden transparency. News networks, left, right, and center, could no longer ignore the substance beneath the spectacle. Rachel, under federal protection, testified behind closed doors. Her courage became a quiet headline, her name now sealed under whistleblower statutes. Jake returned to private consulting, but his last words to Pam stayed with her. Some things are worth losing sleep over. This was one of them. As for Pelosi, she didn't step down. Not immediately. The speaker issued carefully worded denials, appeared at fundraisers, and moved like someone holding the walls up around her. But the cracks were showing. Allies distanced themselves. Party leaders grew silent. Investigations, once unimaginable, now loomed like shadows behind every podium she stood at. Pam didn't crow about the fallout. She didn't need to. Instead, she returned to Florida, back to her house by the water, and watched the news not with satisfaction, but with a deep, tired peace. The battle had cost her clients, comfort, anonymity, but what she gained couldn't be measured in career points. She had struck a blow not just at a person, but at the assumption that power always walks away clean. In an interview weeks later, a young journalist asked her the question that lingered in every viewer's mind. Would you do it all again, knowing what you'd lose? Pam looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. I didn't lose, she said. I reminded them that even giants cast shadows, and that sometimes it just takes one voice to turn the light on. And that was it. No fireworks, no parades. Just a single, undeniable truth. The system had been shaken, and the woman who dared to shake it? She walked away with her head high and her conscience clear. Because some wars aren't won in courtrooms. They're won when silence breaks. And truth answers back.